Hello everybody, Dr. Connors again. This video is talking about step number 1. This is really your first step in starting to get a handle on your autoimmune disease, and it's an honest self-assessment of triggers. And this is where it does become difficult because sometimes we don't know what's triggering it. And we want to always go to your history and that honest assessment, self-assessment of trying to figure this out. What is triggering this thing? And this is where testing is so invaluable because it can tell us, the triggers that you don't always see. Remember, these are IgA reactions that are typically not an IgE immediate response where it's like eating a peanut and your throat starts to close off. It's, eating gluten and you don't notice any symptoms for, 16 to 20 hours. How are you going to notice if this is a trigger for your autoimmune disease? It's difficult. So I'm not making this step easy, but I'm saying that we do need to dig into this. We need to figure this out. What are my triggers that are firing off my immune reaction? So this is the clinical management that we're talking about, this first piece. What are some different possible foods, some different possible chemicals, pathogens, stressors, sleep issues? We need to dig into all these different things from a self-assessment standpoint, and then later, possibly if we can, to do some testing to fine-tune what is firing these reactions. So first, autoimmunity, it can be fired by dietary proteins. So if I have self-antibodies, antibodies to self-tissue, let's say I have antibodies to my thyroid gland, therefore I have Hashimoto's disease, anything that I eat, if I have antibodies to that dietary protein in that food, and I'm going to fire an immune reaction because I ate that food, it's going to then attack my thyroid gland. So if I fire an immune response, I will destroy, my immune system will destroy that which I have antibodies against first. So if I have antibodies against my thyroid, and I also have antibodies against gluten, and I'm eating gluten, I'm firing this immune reaction in my gut that's causing inflammation in my gut, causing damage in my gut, causing damage in my brain, inflammation in my brain, but it's also damaging my thyroid simply because I'm creating an immune response when I have self-antibodies to a tissue. So that's why it's important to look for these triggers. That's why it's important to assess food intake. If I have antibodies to different foods, and it's typically the proteins or the peptides of the food, then I will destroy tissue when I eat foods that I have these antibodies against. Can't overemphasize this. I have a bunch of videos on this, and I'm not trying to scare you, but you've got to deal with this. So it's not even just what I just said. It's also cross-reacted foods and cross-reacted immune reactions. And it gets even more complicated. It can be different combined foods. You can have a reaction to cooked corn or cooked carrots and not to raw carrots, or vice versa. That's why it's good to do a test. But we can't do a test. Always trying to look now, self-assessment here. Trying to make this easy peasy. Trying to look at self-assessment. So in another video, you'll see that sodium, salt, can be a major trigger for autoimmune disease. If you haven't seen that video, catch that video, because that's a hidden thing. That's not an immune reaction. That's not a sensitivity like I have antibodies to sodium. It's simply this reaction that takes place in a certain percentage of people that have an autoimmune disease. When they eat salt, it fires an attack on that organ. It's crazy. I know, it gets depressing. It's like, I can't salt my food. I'll take all the joy out of my life. But it's not necessarily mean you have to stay away from it for life. So it doesn't mean you have to stay away from it completely. It's impossible to. We do need sodium, but understanding that could be a trigger. Look at that. Boy, what I do, that is it. I couldn't figure out which food it is. If I thought it was corn and the corn chips, maybe it's the salt. Could sugar spike, sugar imbalances, glucose imbalances in my bloodstream affect my autoimmune issue? Yes. So look at that. Boy, I thought it was you know, the dairy in that brownie, and it's actually the sugar in that brownie. That spiked a glucose reaction, and that spiked a reaction in my body. Food coloring, huge thing. Additives and colorings are huge, not just for kids, but these are huge inflammatory markers, especially with brain inflammation. GMO sensitivity, pesticides, things like that, all these can ramp up my immune response. The most common of these are gluten, dairy, corn, egg. With thyroid issues, you got molecular mimicry going on with gluten and the thyroid. So that is just, I mean, if you have Hashimoto's, nobody with Hashimoto's should be eating gluten. Just cross that off your list, period. There's just no exceptions there. I don't care if you did a food antibody test and it was negative for gluten. It's a molecular mimic to the thyroid gland. So, you have circulating peptides, gliadin peptides. It's going to fire a reaction in your immune system, and it's going to kill thyroid tissue. So nobody with thyroid issues, or I should say everybody that has an autoimmune thyroid, whether it be Graves or Hashimoto's, has got to be gluten-free. Dairy, molecular mimics with dairy and gluten, cross-reactants with dairy and gluten are very common. Corn, egg, nightshades, especially with arthritides like rheumatoid, psoriatic arthritis, very, very common that nightshades are a major cause of inflammation there. Sugar that I just talked about, glutamates in food, huge thing, especially if you have genetic conversion issues with GAD genes and the other glutamate genes that converts glutamine, which is an amino acid found in a lot of different things and our proteins that we're eating, converts it readily to glutamate. Glutamate acts as a neurotransmitter, and it's an excitatory neurotransmitter. It causes a lot of brain inflammation and a lot of issues. Food additives, colorings, pesticides, chemicals that we're exposed to, these are all possible triggers. These are the things you want to look at and do an honest self-assessment of these things. Sensitivity to chemicals and reaction to chemicals. It can be because of impaired hepatic biotransformation. That's a fancy way of saying issues with my detox pathways in my liver. Impaired microbiome biotransformation, fancy way of saying issues with my phase 4, 5, and 6 detox pathways. If you don't know what that is, look at the detox course, read my book on the phases of detoxification. I'll have more information in this course on that as well. Depletion of antioxidants. Antioxidants are the sole purpose of helping to prevent oxidation. So chemicals in our environment, why are they damaging to us? They cause oxidizing reactions to our cells. These are major cancer causers. Okay, that's our major patient population is cancer. People, you gotta be understanding that this is a major, if not the most common cause of cancer, is lack of antioxidants and exposure to oxidizing agents. These are found in your cosmetics, found in your cleaning supplies, BPA, plastics, formaldehydes, glues, benzenes from smoke, cigarette smoke, car exhaust, pesticides, herbicides. These are the most common things that we see. Huge issue. You need to deal with these things and notice exposure to these things and cut down on exposure to these things, even if you don't feel like that they're triggers. So we're looking for triggers here again. Any other triggers, immune triggers? How common have I heard that, boy, after I got sick, after I got COVID, after I got this vaccine, after I got another tick bite, this flared the whole thing. I went into a moldy room and it flared the whole thing and it made everything worse. Very, very common to have susceptibility to pathogens where it causes reactivity and of latent immune issues and latent viral issues. Can stimulate a Epstein-Barr virus, issue can stimulate a Lyme issue that had been latent for a long period of time. Very, very common. Look for these types of triggers. Stress is so often overlooked, but it is because it's just kind of normal that we have such work demands on us. We put such work demands on us, and we just kind of overlook it. Don't overlook unhealthy relationships. Don't overlook sleep issues, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. Not having friends. I mean, your Facebook friends are not your friends, okay? You have to have close interpersonal relationships. Study after study after study talk about close interpersonal relationships. Get involved in a church. Get involved in a support group. Get involved in a community of other people that like to do the things that you like to do. That can make the greatest difference on your autoimmune responses and how your body can balance this. Talk about personal susceptibility. This is a key component to that. Increased stress decreases your immune response, can increase your risk of cancer, increases your risk of all sorts of toxicity issues, because neurologically, your parasympathetic nervous system controls your liver detoxification pathways. And when you're under a sympathetic demand, meaning you're under a hyper stress demand all the time, your parasympathetics are going to be imbalanced, suppressed. Your pathways, your neurological pathways are going to be depressed. Healthy immune response is going to be depressed, and your susceptibility to all sorts of disease, including cancer, goes way up. So can't overemphasize that. Assess the amount of sleep you're getting. Are you really getting adequate sleep? Do you feel guilty for taking naps? Are you getting deep sleep? Are you feeling rested when you wake up? There's issues that can be with your cortisol, your adrenals, your pituitary thyroid access that can cause all this. It can be as simple as I need to start eating some protein before I go to bed, to I need to really get my hormones checked through a full Dutch panel and see how, what is really causing this, and it could be as simple as dealing with that. But not getting enough sleep can kill you, literally. So you really need to look at that and be honest with yourself about that as well. I talked about exercise and over-exercising. Certainly under-exercising is a major component. If you have a sedentary lifestyle and you're not out doing anything, well, that's not going to help anybody. But over-exercising can be equally a problem. So if you are, thinking that exercise, and you grew up in a lifestyle that you were very athletic, and you think that's going to be your solution, I'm going to just start training for a marathon or something like that. That especially if you have any type of brain inflammation, any microglial priming in the brain, certainly neural antibody formation, you can't over-exercise. You got to go really slow. So make sure that you keep a balance with that. With all of this, when we assess this, everybody's completely different. Some people are going to react to different things. I can't go into a house with mold in it. If I eat gluten, it just tips me over. Food coloring just throws me off. If I give my kid, something with dairy, it just completely blows them out. Everybody is going to be different with that. That's what this whole idea is, finding out where your balance is so that you can manage this the best way you can, because that's really what we're talking about. Is lifestyle and managing this and keeping this balance. Try to keep your autoimmune disease in a state of remission. It's not talking about curing, it's balancing this in remission. Hey, I can live this way. With also to having joy in your life. We don't want you to have to eliminate everything in your diet and not have any joy in your life, but you have to get into balance. That's the whole key. So that's what we're studying. We're continuing to study. Know that I'm praying for you, and you're praying for me, I hope too. And we'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.